Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Found in Interpretation Podcast. Once again, I'm one of your hosts, Alain Breton, and I'm accompanied again with my co-host, Brian Bickford.
Hello, and yes, not only are the two of us here, but we also have a guest with us, Steven Gaudet. Hi, Steven.
Hey guys, happy to be
Uh,
here. Good to see you.
so you might be wondering who Steven Gaudet is. One second,
We
So
need to
I
solve
would
this
like
mystery.
yes, exactly. Stephen, who is Stephen? Actually, I'm gonna introduce him and then we can begin. So Stephen is originally from Saint Antoine, New Brunswick, and our guest began studying clinical psychology at the University of Moncton, earning his bachelor's degree in 1997. Then he moved to Quebec City to pursue a master's in theology, followed by a doctorate in theology at the University of Sherbrooke. In 2016, he also completed a master's in translation and terminology at Laval University, launching an independent career in translation and interpretation. He's passionate about interpretation. He has worked on major projects such as the SAAQ and also for major media outlets such as the RDI, which is sort of the CBC News in French, and also CTV, if I'm not mistaken. And he's an
Right.
interpreter for key political events, especially these days when it comes to American politics. Because if I'm not mistaken, Stephen, you have been doing the simultaneous interpretation from English to French for the American presidential debates. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, I've been doing I've been doing ADI Radio Canada for actually close to a couple of years now. Starting doing replacements for the permanent person who's working as the interpreter at the Radio Canada. So yeah, I've had a chance to do mostly in the beginning when there's no election cycle. Of course, you don't have any stuff to interpret with that's related to an election. So I started replacing and doing just the daily grind of news that comes in, and yeah, slowly that kind of built up to the election cycle in Canada first of all, and during the last elections, and this time around the U.S. elections, which is a pretty big thing for everyone actually. This pivotal considered a pivotal election. So yeah, it was an honor to be doing to be asked to do that. So yeah,
That's great. Yeah,
yeah,
and I see that. Yeah, the elections are coming up next week for the Americans, but do you also do provincial and federal election
yeah,
um in Canada? Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I also do that. Actually, how I started is I actually started with CTV News back in 2022. So I got asked by, long story short, an American company, well, companies, to do Canadian news on CTV News, so the Canadian television broadcaster. And so it was just to do the breaking news, anything that has to be live coverage of the basically the daily news. So they send me this kit, home kit, through the mail. It's kind of a home studio of sorts,
So it's
and
like a
you plug it
laptop?
in. No, well, it's a I forgot the technical name for it, but it does have a name though. It costs something like what they told me, like $10,000, but it's smaller than actually a computer, and it's kind of like this tiny console that you plug in your Ethernet, you plug in your headphones in there. They supply the headphones, they supply all the connections, and so on and so forth. And then you're connected to the control room in Toronto. And so the first time around, I got the call. They sent me the kit, and then I had absolutely no experience in live television broadcasting. So they called me up. It was a Saturday morning, um, saying, "Are you available to do a live event?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's my first great occasion, great. It's my first time. I'm going to test out how this is, how it works, and everything." So I'm thinking, they're probably going to say, well, can you do this like tomorrow or next week? There's something coming up, because we're, as interpreters, we're used to these gigs that are not like, you know, right away. So they tell me, and I'm just waking up, by the way. Okay, it's Saturday morning. I'm just waking up, still have sand in my eyes and all of that. So, and they say, well, it'd be for in about 2 minutes. And I'm like, 2 minutes? So, yeah. And I say, well, what's the topic? They say, well, it's Prime Minister Trudeau is going to introduce the new Governor General. So, yeah. So that was my
Was
kind
it
of like
Lise
baptism
Payette?
of fire.
Was it Lise Payette or
No, the
the lady that came
current,
after? The current one. Okay.
yeah, the current Indigenous a woman. So that was my baptism of fire, basically. So I kind of got up, washed my face with cold water, and then got on my little console there, put on the headphones, and off I went. So that was the beginning of I'd say just about a 2-year stint with CTV News, part-time, of course, when breaking news happened. And I wasn't always at home, of course. You don't sit by your console always waiting for the news. So you're texted and, are you close by? And if you're close by, well, they ask you to go. Otherwise, it's going to be another colleague. I think back in the
Did they
day, we
have
were
a
about
big pool of
three.
interpreters? Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry, I was gonna ask.
Yeah, we were like three, I believe. Yeah. Which is not very much, though, when you consider that you actually need someone to do the news.
They pay you
Breaking
by the
news.
minute? They pay you by the gig? How does it work?
With that company, it was paid. It was paid by I
We don't need
think
to know how much
paid
either.
by the
You just
No,
hour.
said
no,
But
not how much, right? Sorry.
anyways,
I
no,
didn't
I'm
imply
not.
that.
I'm not going to tell you how much though. But no,
Fact
it was
checkers
paid.
will be there to tell us.
That's right.
Yeah, I think it was paid by. I think it was paid by the hour. Yeah, but it's not. It's nothing compared, to the rates that we can go and fetch with
Yeah.
freelancing. So the regular
And if it's
freelancing
like
type work. So.
if it's like 20 minutes, they'll round it up to the hour. Like that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, Brian, that sounds familiar. Yeah, I think if I did like over half an hour, they'd round it up to the next hour. So it's something like that. Yeah,
That's cool. Yeah,
yeah.
cool. And have you had like the opportunity to interpret for a lot of like celebrity politicians and quote unquote?
Well, for Canada, let's stick with CTV News. For CTV News, I did pretty much. That was the time when it was a Canadian election cycle, if I'm not mistaken. So, I did press conferences for the different leaders of the parties. Um, uh, Other than that, I did pretty much everyone. Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh. Back then, it was who was the leader? It was Oh, it wasn't
Okay,
Poiliev. It was
O'Toole.
someone else.
It was O'Toole. Before Poiliev, it was O'Toole.
O'Toole. O'Toole. Yeah, that's right. So
Do you
yeah, I
know
got a
if
chance to do pretty much.
do you know if the reason why you were sent a kit was because of COVID back in the day, or was it just standard?
No, that's actually the standard way they do it because the control room's in Toronto. So if we wanted to actually do any work, it would be unrealistic for us to, travel back and forth to Toronto to do the gigs. So they sent us these kits through the mail, through courier actually, and so they got to us, and everything went pretty good. I'd say all in all, it's pretty efficient way of doing things.
So the sound is good. Like it comes with like I guess you said a headset, so you get
Yeah,
the feed from the Toronto studio, and you can adjust the
that's right.
volume and everything.
Yeah, you can adjust your own volume. I mean, it's not very complicated on the interpreter's side. It looks kind of complicated, but there's a few buttons that you don't touch. Don't touch those. So we're aware of what buttons to touch and what buttons to not touch. But most of the work is done back in Toronto, back in the control room. So, you just relax and do your thing and let the guys in the control room handle the hard stuff. So that's
Do you
one of the advantages.
you only hear or you get to see?
So we are with CTV News. I was on, it was FaceTime actually. I had a FaceTime feed on my phone, and I was plugged in directly to the control room via internet and heard through these. So it's kind of like an acrobatic, a thing when you consider the technical workings of it all, not being versed in any of that. I couldn't tell you how they did it, but it worked out pretty good. Yeah, of course you've got bugs sometimes. I think that's normal, but all in all, it was a pretty efficient way of doing things.
That
Yeah.
sounds pretty cool. It almost sounds like a MacGyver solution. Like I've got a phone, I've got a this. Let's put everything together and get an interpretation booth in your house. Like
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, if we had that type of equipment as interpreters all the time, I mean, you don't need that much technical expertise. But of course, you've got to have it on the other side. You got to have someone on the other side who handles that type of thing. So when you're dealing with television studios, radio stations, and all that, they've pretty much got the expertise to handle, I would say, any kind of trip up or stuff like that. But
But
that was
there's no preparation, right? There's no preparation possible. You just get called, you got to do something, and you got to just be aware of the current events.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So I'm biking in July. I'm just giving you an example. So I'm just on my bike, coming back home from a bike ride, and I get a text, and so it's the studio, the control room in Toronto saying, "Can you be on in 5 minutes? We're going to talk about there's going to be a press conference briefing on the BC wildfires." So I'm like, okay, I'm on my bike. I'm getting home in like 3 minutes, so I've got 2 minutes to set up. I should be good. So I get home and I set up and everything's fine. But, I mean, they're very used to turning around on a dime over there. So if you're not ready to go, they've got someone else who's really ready to go behind you. So if ever you can't jump in, they always prepare two people. That's my experience of it. So to get that kind of, hit the ground running type, constant uninterrupted flow of interpreted news. So, but I think that's the responsible way of doing it. I mean, because they basically can't rely on a guy who's riding his bike and saying, "Sure, I'll be there in 3 minutes." Yeah, anything can happen. So they've got pretty much their people lined up so it can work
well,
efficiently. But it's still nerve-wracking though.
Yeah, is that how you got later on in CBC Radio Canada?
CBC Radio Canada, it's kind of blurry how that happened. I guess I did a replacement for the person who's full time here, and I also have a few other colleagues of mine had already talked to me about, because they also do contract work for Radio Canada CBC, and I had heard of it already, and I was familiar with it, but I just never thought I'd do it. So, but one time, I was just called up and can you do replacement work? And I'm like, sure, I'd like to see how that works. And at the start, I thought it'd be like CTV where I would be set up at home and everything would be hunky dory and I'd have my, kit in front of me and all of that. But they say, no, it has to be inside the studios in the Radio Canada, interpretation booth, which is a very small room. It's about, I don't know, maybe 8 feet by 10, something like that. So yeah, so I said yes, of course. I said yes. It was something that I had already had experienced with CTV News, and except this was from English into French this time for the news happening elsewhere than Quebec. So in the rest of Canada, in the US, and all around the world. So if there's news coming in English, I am basically interpreting for the French audience in Quebec or francophones in, the Maritimes and Ontario and basically all across Canada. So that was quite that was quite an interesting, I would say, perspective for me because I'm a French speaker. My mother tongue is, French, and so it's kind of a way of, coming back to your roots and giving back, informing people of your culture, of your language, about important events that happen. So, yeah, I was quite happy to do that.
Cool. So for CTV,
Right.
it was basically everything that was said in French by a politician was interpreted into English. And now you're
Yeah,
having the opposite experience with Radio Canada going from English to French.
exactly. And to tell you the truth, I like CBC Radio Canada, doing CBC Radio Canada much more than I did CTV News because it's
We have to delete that part from the
personal
podcast.
to me. Yeah, no, but CTV News is okay though. They're a great news station. But personally, I'm talking about my personal feeling about, what it gives me, what I get out of it. So it was kind of like it CBC Radio Canada really allows me to kind of give back to the Francophone community where I come from. It's kind of like what do you call that? A cycle that's coming to its end, right? So I was born there, and now I kind of get to give back in a certain way. That's how I perceive it. Plus, it's
Yeah,
just kind of fun having your mom call you when you're, doing President Biden. She says, "Oh yeah, I'm listening to you right now." So it's
Well,
surreal.
now that you mention it, we wanted to touch a little bit, since the election is coming next week, we wanted to touch a little bit about how did you, I mean, of course, by being at Radio-Canada, you were asked to do the presidential debates from English to French. Can you tell us how does that work? How do you prepare? Is it one interpreter per a speaker? Tell us more about it. I'm very curious about that.
Right. So you've got to know that even for a French, speaking broadcaster such as Radio Canada, CBC News, it's well, Radio Canada, not CBC, but in any case, it's U.S. news, especially the elections, is huge news. I mean, it's covered in detail. I mean, if you follow the American elections and you follow what's going on at the Radio Canada, I mean, there's special shows on analyzing the U.S. election, and it's a big thing. It's a big thing, and so it's kind of like a beast in itself. There's regular day-to-day interpreting the news, kind of, coming in, and press conference for this, a press conference for that, a wildfire or a law that comes into effect or whatnot. And so the American election cycle has really been for me kind of how could I say, kind of like a battlefield situation where you've got to really gear up and prepare yourself because the bullets are going to fly.
How do you prepare for that? Because you did Biden or Trump
Well,
in the first debate.
Yeah, in the first debate I did, I think was on June 27th of this year. June 27th was the Biden Trump debate. And so I was asked by my colleague at Radio Canada to do the debate. So that's part of the fun thing of it, is being asked, of course, to be his partner. So he said, well, okay, it's two guys, so I'll be one guy, you be the other guy, and I'm going to be nice with you because I'm going to give you. He says I'm going to give you Biden. Oh, so I
You'll have
say,
to explain
okay,
to us why. That's the
okay,
nice.
what does that mean? What does that mean? So I'm thinking, well, yeah, Trump kind of has a way of speaking that is non-conventional, kind of, veers off script and is all over the place and doesn't finish his sentences and switches around, and all the topics are like, it's kind of like a big ball of yarn at the end, and you don't quite know what the heck it is anymore. So I kind of understood. I got it, and I said, well, sure, thanks. That's very kind of you. And so I'm gearing up, doing Biden, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have the easy part. And so I'm studying, I'm studying American policy and past debates that Biden already had, past, what's the terminology used in those debates, the big categories, the economy, the immigration, and so on and so forth. So I've got all my ducks lined up, and fast forward to the debate night.
Could you sleep the night before?
I could sleep. Oh yeah. I could sleep because I think I was prepared. Plus I already have a pretty solid experience as a simultaneous interpreter. So albeit it's a whole different beast. I can give you the details, but I slept.
We want to hear the details. That's why you're here.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So just to finish my Biden story. So the next day, I get to the studio early, meet the production team. And, I've got my whiteboard, which I carry with me in the room with I write my terminology on it because I have this huge whiteboard that I put right next to the big mic. And I have the screens in front of me. So I have my whiteboard with all the main terms. And so it starts. And I don't remember who went first. I think Trump may have started. So I'm like, kind of like rubbing my hands, waiting for Biden, pacing all over the place, but with a kind of like a normal nervous feeling about it. But then Biden starts talking, and I'm like, within 2 minutes, I was literally saying to myself, oh, why did I have to take Biden instead of Trump? So that was
Pick your
awful.
poison.
Oh my Lord. I mean, as interpreters, we are used to already when the sound's not good or when the person's not speaking correctly or when they stutter or hesitate or all of that, you're like kind of like semi-panicking because the people are it's a product that you're offering to people and you want it to be a quality product. So but this was totally crazy. Plus, as I said, the interpretation in front of it, on live television is another beast because it's not just, a few people in a room that you're interpreting for. You've got a lot of eyes and a lot of ears actually counting on your interpretation of this event because certain people are listening to you because they want to go vote. That's something that I never had thought about before doing a debate, is that I was told by an actual person who was going to listen to the debate that her vote was going to depend on what she heard me interpret. So, you've got all that, external pressure of, who's listening to me and you've got people depending on you. So then when Biden started off and I'm like, all of that stress just comes down on you like a ton of bricks and you're like, oh my Lord, how am I going to get through this? And I'm looking at my watch and it's only about 5 minutes that's gone by. And this is going to be like an hour and a half debate. So I'm thinking, oh Lord, how am I going to get through this? So, what
And
can
there's
you
no
do?
relays, right? It's just
There is
1
no
hour and a
relay.
half.
It's
That's
Because
right.
for our audience,
So-
interpreters switch turns every 30 minutes. And this is like an hour and a half nonstop with all the pressure.
Exactly. So your interpreter internal clock after 30 minutes is actually telling you,
Take a breather. Yeah.
Commercial break, please.
take a breather. That's right.
Yeah.
But you don't have that. All you've got is your trusty little bottle of water and your notepad and your whiteboard, and that's it. I mean, you're kind of like, skydiving. You just basically are either going to make it or not.
Yeah.
So,
And even if you're not interpreting, then you still have to listen to what Trump is saying, right? Or the interpreter who's doing Trump. You
Yeah.
have to pay attention so that you can what their answer is going to be potentially, right?
exactly.
And
I
then,
mean, you've got to pay attention to everyone.
is there a third interpreter doing the moderator or no?
So there's usually an interpreter for each candidate and another interpreter for, thank goodness, for the moderators, because, we have maybe a tendency to think the moderators don't speak that much, but all in all, I mean, they do speak a lot during the debate. They have long questions, interventions,
So,
the
are
back
you
and
guys
forth.
next to each other in the booth, like in the studio? Or because then if they're speaking over each other, then you might hear, and there might be a feedback loop.
Yeah. So at first I thought we would be in the same room, but we're not. We're in actually 3 different studios, on the same floor, but in 3 different rooms, not necessarily close by. But some people might say, "Ooh, that must be harsh, not seeing or not hearing your
I was
colleague."
thinking that.
But at the same time, as the debate approached and I was thinking about it, I'm thinking, well, it kind of gets you closer to that reality of a debate where you don't know when your colleague has stopped talking. And so you may just talk over him.
Hmm.
And that gives you the kind of a more realistic a hint to the debate, because the interpreters are actually going to be also speaking over each other without knowing it, of course, but they are going to be speaking over each other. And I think that reflects a certain reality of the debate, unless, of course, it's some closed mic debate, then you don't have that much probability of people talking over each other. Like in the vice presidential debate,
Which you did.
between Vance, which I also did, between Vance and Tim Walz. Um, those were open mic. That was an open mic debate. So there, the interpreters probably, I couldn't hear, of course, but probably what happened there is that the interpreters more than once talked over each other, just like the candidates did.
Did you
So
get to
we're
do
not
JD
tempted.
Vance or Tim Walz?
I did JD Vance that time.
He's a
I
Wow.
did
fast
JD
talker.
Vance. He was a fast talker, yeah. But I think in the end, I prefer JD Vance because I prefer people talking faster than people talking in a more, how could I qualify Walls? It was more kind of,
Mellow?
um, well, kind of like an anecdotal, informal, kind of humoristic, sometimes jumping a little bit all over the place, using more familiar language from maybe Wisconsin, or a play on words sometimes. And I was sometimes wondering, I wonder how the other guy's doing with Tim Walz. So I was okay with Van speaking fast, because he didn't really he's more of an intellectual and kind of stayed with a, how could I say, a more maybe grounded terminology. So for me it was easier.
Cool.
Yeah,
And
but it's a challenge. It's still a challenge though.
did you have an issue of going, say, from like when you did Biden, you're interpreting a Democrat, to going to interpreting a Republican, or is there a difference? Do you feel differently according to which party you're interpreting for? Like, is there a I mean, I know,
Before,
like, as interpreters, we have to be kind of like Switzerland and leave all our prejudices aside, right? So, like,
yeah, tell you the truth, the only time I think about party affiliation is before I do the actual job of interpreting. When I did, for example, when I did the debate, the June 27th Biden Trump debate, I was actually in the States. I was in New Hampshire on vacation, at a participating in a science conference, and so I came back to the studios in Montreal to do the debate. And it's really funny because when people hear that you are going to be doing a debate, especially over there. I was in the U.S. and I had plenty of U.S. citizens around me who are scientists and people who have a higher education and are sometimes more aware of the intrinsic details of a campaign, and so on and so forth. And so these people, when they learned that I was going to interpret the debate, then it was like I don't know how many times I heard, well, if you're going to do Trump, can you make him talk and make sense? So,
in other words,
so
can
yeah,
you
you
change things
get a lot
around a
of that.
bit?
Can you change things around? Yeah, and I say, unfortunately, I can't.
But
Some people joke about it, but some people are darn serious about it too. Can you make them say something else? And I'm like, no,
but me
no,
but
unfortunately.
maybe not saying something else, but okay. In a normal conference, sometimes people I try to round things up. When I hear something and I want to make a complete sentence for our audience. But when you're in a debate like this and you got two elderly politicians with different abilities when it comes to their way of speaking and everything, and sometimes Biden kind of looked lost. Were you? I mean, did you round up his sentences, or when Biden really sort of didn't make sense, you just went with it?
Well, you got to distinguish, I think, when you're doing an interpretation, especially on live television, where you've got, and during an election, I add, where you've got so many people listening to the details of his voice, how he's talking, to in my head, it kind of it's a way that people use to decide how they're going to vote sometimes. So that's always something kind of like in the back of your head. However, people have got to distinguish the interpreter's job. You mustn't confound being a celebrity imitator and being a qualified interpreter who gets the basic message through. So, for example, when Biden sometimes stutters, he still does. And during that June 27th debate, he did, and he wasn't clear on a lot of levels. He was mumbling and wasn't very clear. So my job is not to imitate the mumbling, right? My job is not to imitate the stuttering. So I am going to get the essential, the basic message out, however difficult that may be. And it was difficult with Biden. I make no mistake about it. So, but yeah, there is kind of like that fine line where you say, well, I do want to transmit to people the fact that, hey, this guy is kind of like having trouble now, right? Um, in order to be able to tell them, well, okay, this candidate is having problems, just like when you look at the English version, the original version, someone's going to say, oh my goodness, I can't, what happened to the guy? So you kind of want that same reaction in French. You want people to say, oh my goodness, what's going on with that guy? But it's a fine line to tread on. You can't, make a mockery out of it by doing a celebrity imitation, as I said. But at the same time, you've got to not be 100% coherent. I mean, you've got to stick to what he's saying. It's a kind of, um, correct as you go kind of thing.
So you
It's really when you're in the act, you make quick decisions on how it should be rendered, basically.
so you're not expected to get
Yeah.
an invitation to Saturday Night Live to impersonate any of these politicians, right?
Oh my Lord, no, no,
But it,
no.
Don't you?
We're
Oh,
not
sorry, Brian.
that
Go ahead first.
talented.
but I do have another question, a little bit more serious. So it's so I was at a conference last week, and it was a training session for newly appointed judges. And I was talking to one of the judges, and he was telling me that when he was a lawyer, he was trying this guy who was like just in his words, he was like kind of like a scum of the earth kind of guy, and he was like, I hope this guy like gets what he deserves and stuff. And the interpreter was this really sweet old 75-year-old lady that really like the jury just loved her. She was just so nice, and like but she was interpreting like this awful man and what he was saying, and he believes that in a way that kind of swayed the jury to try and differently or to come with a different verdict than what he expected. So I'm just wondering, like with like yourself, and you're much younger than Biden, and I'm assuming your colleague was probably younger than 78-year-old Trump, but do you think that might sway things a bit? Like just the like you have a younger, more vibrant voice doing the voice of an octogenarian, basically.
Yeah, I don't know if it would go if it would be at that level. Again, if maybe I was interpreting for like 45 million people at the same time, maybe that would have more of an impact. Um, to the extent that people who are receiving the French interpretation are not in majority going to vote in the election. They are listening to it just to for well entertainment purposes or to get a better feel of the election and how it's going and what the turnouts go, what the results going to be eventually be. So that I'd say that for television for in the debate category of interpretation, I don't think that weighs too heavy in the balance. Um, I think people also have know where reality lies. I mean, they know that I'm not the person with They know that I'm not an 80-year-old person with a 50-year-old voice. So yeah, I think probably it would be different if I were maybe a Spanish interpreter interpreting inside the United States for the Spanish,
Why
For
would
Latino
the
it be
50
electorate.
different?
million.
Well, because you're interpreting for millions of people who are going to actually vote in the debate, and that may make a difference if you multiply. You've got quite a lot of people that'll be listening to you, and like it or not, some people can be swayed by something. If they can be swayed by, oh, I'm going to vote for that politician because he's good looking, they can maybe be swayed by hearing a young voice on an old Biden or a young voice on an old Trump. Who am I to? But I think that is possible. But personally, for me, I don't think the fact that I am a younger person interpreting an older person makes that much of a difference, though.
Yeah,
Did you
because the
do the?
Hispanics, like the
Oh,
number of Hispanics in the United States outnumber even the number of Canadians there are in Canada. So, yeah, I see what you mean about that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, go
Exactly.
go ahead, Alain.
Oh, I was just wondering because now you were going to an important point, Stephen, which is you don't think that, for instance, you're younger than Biden, everybody is, then then uh, you people can tell the difference. But what about Kamala Harris and Donald Trump? Did you also do that debate? And who did you play this? I mean, who did you interpret? I shouldn't
I
say
think
play. You're not an
you're not
imitator.
Alec
Now we know.
Baldwin. Yes.
That's right.
So yeah. So how did
Alec
that happen?
Baldwin. Yeah.
Because she's a woman. So did they ask a female
Uh,
interpreter to do Kamala Harris, or how did
yeah.
that?
Yeah. They have their minimum requirements. So if it were two female candidates, it would have been two women interpreters. So yeah, it, when they can, they even try to get a female moderators. Female, if it's a female moderator, they try to get a female moderator. If it's one or
But the
two
ABC
women.
debate had a both male and female moderator.
Yeah, I was getting to that because in that case, if I'm not mistaken, one, there was only one interpreter doing the moderators, and so I think it was a woman, who was doing both female and male moderators. Uh, or is it the other way around? I'm not sure, but I know that it was just one person doing the moderation for both sexes, if you will. So that kind of passes, that passes. But with the candidates themselves, they prefer having one a male interpreter for a male candidate and female for female. Yeah.
And how did you make like, for instance, we talked earlier about the fact that if Biden stutters, you don't. But if he doesn't really make sense, then you kind of follow on that. But how can you make sure that the audience doesn't think that it's the interpreter that is at fault here and not the candidate?
Well, there's no guarantee that the audience, you know, uh, knows if it was really the candidate or myself. So I think that's another reason why an interpreter doing a debate such as the one I talked about for the Biden-Trump debate, it's another reason for an interpreter not to fall into that, trying to imitate the stuttering or imitate the mumbling or this and that, because it can get touchy because people are going to, people not familiar with interpretation are going to be like, whoa, what did that interpreter drink before the debate? What's going on here?
That
Um,
happens, yeah.
so yeah. So I think it's
Not the drinking, but the people thinking. Just
exactly,
just want to make
exactly.
sure for fact checkers here.
I had
Yes.
you, Alain. I had you.
There's no Bailey's
So
in her coffee in the morning.
no, that's right. So it's kind of like keeping that middle ground, doing your job as efficiently as you can, but also not cleaning up 100%, not cleaning up the message 100%. You can get some hesitations in there. You can get some parts where you slow down, where he slows down, but imitating is very touchy because once you start that, I mean, people are going to interpret the wrong thing, and that's not where you want to be as an interpreter.
No,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
Now, did you interpret the Trump Harris debate as well?
No, I didn't do the Trump Harris debate. I just did the Trump. I did the Trump. Well, I got the best of both worlds. I did the Trump Biden, and then I did the VP debate between Walz and Vance. So yeah. But I listened to my colleagues doing the Trump Harris
Harris.
debate. Yeah, and it's a lot more relaxing listening to your colleagues than
Oh,
doing
I
it
bet.
yourself.
Did you listen to your own interpretation afterwards to see how you sounded like, or you're like, I don't want to, like, I'm not
I
going there.
Listen, it's very interesting because I never listen to my interpretations, okay? Because I am allergic to that. I cannot. I just like, I imagine like a lot of people, I don't like hearing myself. I don't like hearing that
So
I
you're
made
gonna
such
not
and
gonna
such a
listen to this
mistake.
podcast later on.
However, I can make an exception, of course.
Okay, thank you,
But
thank you.
however, the second part of my answer, I do have my kids and people in my family who do listen to what I do. So they often re-listen to it. And, if I'm in the room or something and I'm like, I have an ear out and I'm like, hey, that's me. I kind of like scoot in and kind of like,
No.
okay, listen to myself. And I'm like, hey, most times I'm like, not that bad, not that bad. So yeah, I think we're too hard on ourselves most of the time. You just need to, and I think it's good for continuous improvement if you do listen to yourself. So yeah, I don't listen, I don't do it myself, but I let some other people, listen to it and I kind of join in most times. Yeah.
Now, I have a question about election day. Are you going to have to, because I'm assuming it's going to go into the wee hours of the morning. So are
Oh yeah.
you going to be like on call all like 24 hours, or how does that work?
I did get the call. I was asked to do it, and first of all, the hours were, well, we're gonna need you from maybe like something like 6 p.m. on election night up to like 2 in the morning. And I'm like, well, I was kind of, hoping to watch the election from home, just relax, kind of like a Super Bowl moment, get the bag of chips out and everything and just relax. And so I said, well, maybe. And so then I, hang up the phone and maybe 5 minutes later, same person asking, well, finally the hours have changed and you're going to be there from 6 to 6 in the morning because you never know with election night what can happen. And this election is probably going to be, if we all know it's going to be, we don't know what to expect.
Something's going to hit
Yeah,
the
nobody
fan. We don't
knows.
know what.
Oh, something's going to hit the fan. It's not going to smell good. So, um, so, so I said, I said no, and I kind of was like happy to say no because I was happy that the hours had changed because that really made me say no. I'm not going to stay there until 6 a.m. Unfortunately, and so that's how I got my election night back. But it would
Well,
have been fun though, no doubt. It would have been amazing to cover that historic event. But
well,
at
I
the
hope
same
that your
time,
contact doesn't listen to this podcast, but because now they'll know what happened in your head when they called you.
yeah. Well, I was pretty transparent, so they already know.
That's good. But having said this won't be the last time we hear from you when it comes to the political events on Radio Canada or on CTV, right?
Yeah, well, there's lots going on. Listen, by the time people listen to this podcast, probably the election results in Saskatchewan will be known. But I'm actually covering tonight, October 28th, the Saskatchewan elections, as I covered last week the British Columbia and New Brunswick
Yeah, New Brunswick.
election evenings. So, and you still have I think, the Nova Scotia elections that are going to be upcoming in November. So, yeah, there's lots going on. There's lots going on. As long as there are elections, there are debates, and as long as there are debates, there are eventually election nights. And so, yeah, I'm very happy to cover those. Yeah,
Wow,
but
that is quite
the,
amazing.
covering the U.S. elections, I must say, is kind of like a peak. It's kind of like climbing that Mount Everest of interpretation in the sense that, well, it's not only interpreting for an event, it's interpreting and being inside history inside the history that's being made at the same time. It's in real time. So that's kind of like the fun part of it. Yeah. So it makes up for the nerves. You got nerves, you got the anxiety, you got the sweaty palms, you got the that feeling you have. I don't know if anyone out there or you guys have ever done skydiving, but when that door opens and you're 3 miles up in the air and they say, well, you got to jump now, we're going to jump in about 10 seconds. That's pretty close as you can get to doing a live interpretation of a presidential debate on television. It's really nerve wracking, but it is amazingly satisfying and amazingly fun to do, I'd say. I love it.
Wow. Well, on that note, we're
Congratulations,
coming to
Steven. Yes.
congratulations. Yes, absolutely.
Thanks. And I have colleagues doing it with me sometimes, and when I'm not there, there's someone else doing it. So they deserve. Yeah, I think not blowing my own horn, as they say, but people who interpret live events on television are a special kind of breed, I would say. Not that we're more special than anyone. I mean, not in that sense, but I think it takes maybe just a little bit more, I think a little bit more nerves, I would say, a little bit more self-control. Um, yeah, I mean, that's, I think, the most important part of it. I mean, learning the terminology, you can do that. I mean, learning the political terms and what's the policies in Saskatchewan and Alberta and here and there. You can go get that information online, no problem. But it's when you're in front of that mic and the only thing separating your little cabin from the whole world is the press of a button. That's where I think you've got to have that little, I don't know, maybe it's
Je ne sais quoi.
It's that je ne sais quoi, exactly, Brian. So I can't put a name on it, but it's special.
So we are at the end of our podcast. So Steven, I would like to thank you for coming. It's been 46 minutes already.
Time flies.
You made it sound quite exciting.
More than the first 5 minutes of a presidential debate, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Of course. Of course. Oh, Lord.
But yes, thank you so much for being on our podcast. This was awesome.
My pleasure, guys. I'm very happy. And I'm looking forward to working with you very soon, dear colleagues.
Yes. And thank you, Alain, for the technical production and everything. It's been awesome. And again,
exactly. All right. And I would like to remind our audience that we're also available on Spotify, on YouTube, soon on Apple podcast platform. So you can listen to this episode and the following ones and the previous ones and all that you want. So on that note, everyone, thank you very much. Again, Steven, for coming. Brian, always great. So we'll see each other next time.
See you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.